Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I really appreciate it. And as always, I have another fantastic guest with me today. His name is Tom Cronin. He is an author, a speaker, a transformation coach, and meditation teacher. He is also the producer of the film The Portal, founder of the app The Portal, and host of transformational meditation retreats. Tom's own personal journey came after experiencing a plethora of difficulties and finding meditation as a powerful tool for health and healing. And now he is transforming lives and changing the world one mind at a time. Tom, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
No, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along today.
So tell us your story. It's quite a fascinating journey that you've had. To get where you are today. So just go ahead and start from the very beginning.
Gosh, you always wonder how far back you should go with that sort of question. Look, I guess we'll go back to when I was in finance. I started my career as a broker on a trading room floor. It was actually the same year of Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, started his career. That was in 1987. And I walked onto a trading room floor and it was this wild, wild west of the finance world. It was kind of crazy times, very much like Wolf of Wall Street in the film, if anyone's seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was really exciting. It was fast paced. It was adventurous. And for a young 19-year-old, it was like my eyes had just been lit up. I just finished backpacking around the world and had some time to fill in before I started a university degree. And I got swept into that sort of very dynamic, fast paced culture. But it wasn't necessarily just the fast pace of the job itself, but there was another culture inside that, which was a lot of drinking, a lot of drugs. It was really wild times. And I kind of got really swept along by that. And when we do something that the body doesn't necessarily agree with, it shows us like a red light on the dashboard. It says, hey, this is not something that's, I don't appreciate this. And so I started getting these symptoms, which is what a red light's like on the dashboard, and the symptom is a signal in the body to let us know that there's an anomaly. And I started getting a lot of anxiety and panic attacks and depression and insomnia, and eventually this sort of continued to exacerbate because I kept ignoring those symptoms. And then eventually it culminated after a few years of being in that industry and living that lifestyle to kind of, I guess it was diagnosed by a doctor as a nervous breakdown. And I was sent to doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists and put on pharmaceuticals, and I was in a really dark place. I couldn't go to work. I had to take mental health leave and was really struggling with life. And that's when I came across meditation.
And how old were you at that time then?
Yeah, I'd been in the industry for about 9-10 years at that point. So what happens is this accumulation of, oh, I'm fine, I'm deteriorating, but I'm fine, I'm deteriorating, but I'm fine. Now I'm just deteriorating, now I'm not fine at all. And that kind of takes a long time. And Deepak Chopra, who's a physician, a wonderful physician, he says that the fifth and final stage of the anomaly showing up in your body is when we get a symptom. And so that anomaly, that imbalance, that problem can be in that system for quite some time before we get alerted to the idea that there's a problem. And that's kind of what we're doing in Western world medicine, is trying to treat that fifth and final stage. And we're not really having much prevention in our approach to health and wellness, unfortunately.
I have to go back to that 19-year-old that walks onto that trading floor after backpacking around the world. I mean, how jarring to your nervous system was that? I mean, just the night and day going from backpacking and this carefree lifestyle into an environment like that must have been so incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it's quite ironic, really. I grew up on a farm, very holistic and wholesome existence, very Irish Catholic sort of existence on a farm. And then after I finished school, it's kind of a rite of passage for a lot of Australians because we live so far away from the rest of the world that when we go overseas, we really go overseas. And so I saved up some money by picking fruit in an apple orchard in my local small town, and then traveled the world. Now, I traveled the world and I was quite a sort of complex thinker. And I was traveling the world carrying books like Jean-Paul Sartre, and other French existential books that, Albert Camus. And I thought I was a sort of a deep thinker that was going to eventually do a journalist degree at university and write articles against capitalistic greed. And I was still going to do that even when I came back. I was listening to the Smiths and Susie and the Banshees and all this sort of stuff. And I was very sort of politically minded about how the world could be a better place. And I
Uh-huh.
was coming from a very political viewpoint, and I was going to do university and do this journalism degree, but I just had some time to fill in before uni started, and I just had
Mm-hmm.
applied to a bunch of jobs in the paper. It
Mm-hmm.
was ironic that I ended up spending 26 years in a career in finance as a broker and couldn't have been any further from that direction.
Yeah, it was absolute the polar opposite. And so I just need to ask, so you didn't have to have any experience in finance to get a job in
Back
it?
then, as a broker, not then. It's changed a little bit these days. They do
Mm-hmm.
want people more qualified. Back then, as a broker, you got a lot of training on the job, and it was more about your sort of your personality, your nature, and whether you
Mm-hmm.
could handle that type of intense
Mm-hmm.
environment. And a lot of the stuff was just trained on the job there.
I also find that fascinating because as you were describing how you grew up and that, then you were going to be a deep thinker and all this reading that you did, and to end up in finance on the trading floor, that really went against your
Mm,
personal, like, belief system, almost like your value system, but you
mm,
just got sucked in with it. But and I'm even wondering if a lot of the anxiety, the depression, the insomnia, and everything that you were experiencing was because you were doing something that was so opposite of what your
absolutely.
spirit wanted.
Yeah, I felt very much a fish out of water. I felt very incongruent.
Mhm,
It was interesting that there was obviously a part of me that was enamored by the charm of the money and the
mm-mm,
lifestyle and the bright, shiny lights. But as you say, what did that lead to? And for
mhm,
a long time, probably the entire time I was in that industry, I felt very much incongruent and misaligned. It was an interesting transition point when I did learn meditation at the age of 29.
mhm,
I actually noticed significant changes in who I was as a person, a
mhm,
huge shift. And I went back into that career for 16 more years, and I was still struggling with being in that career. But by
mhm.
that point, we got to the point where we had big mortgages and children,
Oh,
and you're kind of in this what we call golden handcuff scenario.
mm,
So I was just
mhm,
meditating and studying, and I went to India and did some teacher training and stuff while I was still a broker, and eventually was
mm,
teaching part time while I was a broker towards the end of my career,
mhm.
and then eventually it became unconditional that it was time to leave and become a full time teacher.
So, how did you discover meditation?
It was a really fascinating day that it happened. I still remember it clear as a bell, and it was 26 years ago. I
Mhm,
was at home on mental health leave, so I couldn't go to
mhm.
work. I developed what's called agoraphobia, and that's
Uh-huh,
where walking out the front door of your house is just too confronting. And
uh,
so I was at home. Now this was 1996. Now 1996, having agoraphobia was kind of monotonous because there's no Netflix, there's no internet, there's just free-to-air TV, which was pretty boring. But there was a documentary I was watching on TV about a property developer. I
mhm,
was fascinated still by business and money and that world. And they were covering this very successful property developer in Australia, and they were talking about how successful he was and all the buildings he'd built. And there was a tiny slither of the story. It was a really small little
mhm,
segment, 2 to 3 minutes max, within an hour of the documentary, that covered how he used meditation, particularly transcendental meditation, as a tool for his success. And so they
mhm,
showed him, while he was doing the voiceover talk about his meditation practice, they
mhm,
showed him meditating, and he was sitting in a pinstripe suit in a chair in a room meditating
mhm,
with his hands on his lap. And I'd always thought of, very, very distant association of
mhm,
meditation with Buddhists and monks and, people with shaved heads. But there was this businessman in a suit meditating. It was like the light bulb moment for me.
uh-huh,
And the next step for me after hearing that word, transcendental meditation, or those two words, it got me really excited. I was very intrigued by this idea of transcending, because at
mhm,
that point I'd been using a lot of drugs, and drugs is about transcending. So I was quite curious about that almost, um, you know, sort of out of body experience that they
mhm,
sounded like they were talking about. And so I picked up the Yellow Pages book, which a few of your listeners, if there are any younger ones, they might not have a clue what I'm talking about. But Yellow
mhm,
Pages was our, early version of Google, where
mhm,
you'd had this big book that had all the companies listed in it. And I went to M for meditation and started looking up meditation. And that's when I
mhm,
started ringing all the different centers in Sydney
mhm,
and going to different centers and looking at different
mhm.
modalities and doing my research into meditation.
Mhm. But nobody had suggested it prior to that point as
No, it was very unheard of back then. This was the
mhm,
1990s. There was no apps, no one was
right.
really, people were just starting to do yoga at that point.
Mhm. Um, I find it really interesting just of seeing that businessman sitting there in his business suit
Mm.
and in his chair meditating. I'm somebody who cannot meditate. I mean, I don't do the traditional sitting meditation. I have to go outside and just, even just in my yard, and then I can kind of calm down and just look at the trees, the grass, listen to the dogs barking in the background, and that really calms my mind. And the fact that he was able to do this in his office, in the work environment, and to be able to just kind of shut everything out. How long does it take to learn how to do something like that?
Well, I was just teaching on the weekend, and I teach nearly every weekend courses.
Mhm,
I'm teaching Amazon tonight. I run classes for the company Amazon. Everyone can meditate. It just depends
mhm,
on what technique you're using.
mhm,
Some techniques are very, very difficult. The beautiful thing about the transcendental meditation or the Vedic meditation tech practices, primordial sound technique practices, is that you get introduced to sound that has a
mhm,
beautiful quality about it that makes the quietening of the mind a very easy process. If
mhm,
we try and empty the mind, it's just not going to happen. The mind doesn't
mhm,
want to be empty. The mind doesn't want
mhm,
to be still. The mind actually finds thinking, analysis, regretting, remembering very, very
mhm,
charming. And the mind's only ever looking for charm. So, what we
mhm,
need to do if we want to go into those deeper, quieter states, unless you're very proficient in the art of meditation and have been doing it for many, many years, but all of my students will have an experience of that transcendental stillness in their first one, two, or three meditation sessions with me.
mhm,
And that's because we're using this sound, or we call it a mantra.
mhm,
And it's not that you can't meditate, it's just that you probably have been using a technique or a method that's very, very difficult to sustain a meditation
mhm.
experience.
Well,
Mm.
it's interesting that you mentioned sound because I think one of the reasons why I do like to go outside in my yard is that I have wind chimes that are very, they're the very large, deep
Mm.
tone. And every time I hear like that tone, it just it's almost like candy for my ears and candy for my
Mm.
brain. And it's just I don't know why it's like that one note, that when
Hmm.
I hear that one sound, it's like, ah, all is well.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, sound. The one thing when we have external sounds, and that could be guided meditations where you're listening to someone,
Hmm.
or you're listening to music, or you're listening to gongs or chimes, is that it still keeps us in that realm of duality, which is you listening
Hmm.
to something else. And that
Hmm.
leaves us to, oh, that thing's making me feel good. And if
Hmm.
we're in duality where that thing is making you feel good and you've lost sovereignty there because that thing is making you feel good,
Hmm.
what that exposes us to is that it also means that things that aren't making us feel good can make us feel bad. And so
Hmm.
we're still in that state of duality and
Hmm.
reactiveness to certain circumstances of life. And what we
Hmm.
want to do is we want to find a sovereign state. And this is where the mantra, which is not really a sound as in like a loud audio sound, it's an internal vibration that you repeat silently inside yourself.
Hmm.
And because it's silent and it's inside yourself, what happens is it has this quality to move you away from the thinking mind, which
Hmm.
is being attracted to the external world of
Hmm.
forms and phenomenon, and going to the
Hmm.
inner world of silence and
Hmm.
stillness. And until we have that direct experience of the inner silence and stillness, we're always going to fall short of what it truly is to be human, because
Hmm.
we're going to be trapped in the duality of me and the world that I'm engaging in, and that
Hmm.
engaging sort of world, that the world that I'm engaging in is going to then affect me in some way, positive or negative. And that's where we lose our sovereignty.
Hmm. How long had you been meditating before you decided you had to be a teacher? And then what
There's
was that like, that transformation, that journey of going into the teacher trainings and going deeper into the art, I would like to call it, of meditation?
there's quite a few years. The process of me getting to a state of feeling even worthy of
Mhm,
wanting to be a teacher took quite a long time. There's a lot of,
mhm,
we call it moss on the stone. It's never like you just start meditating and then you're a pure enlightened monk and ready to show the world how to live in a particular way. It took me quite a long time to even get some semblance of
mhm,
calmness, stability, and not that I wasn't experiencing in meditation, but just to be feeling like I was worthy of that role took
mhm,
quite a long time. And even when I did step in to become a teacher, I still grappled with my flaws and fallibilities that were still, in existence, and still even to this day after being a teacher for many years. I think we never really arrive fully. There's always some degree of, I guess, questioning as to whether you're worthy of being in that position to some respects. So it was I've been meditating about 15 years before I decided to do my teacher training. Yeah.
Well, it's a huge responsibility to step into that role of a teacher, especially when you're so passionate about it. And then all of a sudden, you're the teacher and influencing a lot of, the students. And it's very stressful in a lot of ways when you're starting to teach something new.
Yeah, there's two things. There's one, teaching something new and doing something new, which could be, being a vet or being a doctor or being a plumber. And then there's being a teacher in this particular space of spirituality, mindset, grappling with people's vulnerability, grappling with people's emotional instabilities. A lot of people come to you in a fairly fragile state a lot of the time. So it's really about being able to support and nurture them through that transformation. Then there's a lot of stress releasing that comes from this particular style of meditation. So you might have people that are releasing many years of stressful experiences that have been sort of stored and shackled in their body. So that can be quite confronting. So yeah, there's a lot of things that you need to navigate through the transformation of a student.
So let's talk about, what is the portal?
Well, the film itself there's a film and a book called The Portal, and that's an exploration into the power of mindfulness and meditation to move us through transformation. The portal is really a passageway that we go through into that realm of the unbounded, into that realm of deep inner silence. And the portal really is a pathway that is meditation. And what we wanted to showcase were 6 individual stories that had all been through their own individual crisis. And we present this idea that crisis is not actually something that we're a victim of. Crisis is a method or a process for transformation. It's a mechanism to up-level us. If we're open and available to that idea. Now, we can either break down or break through, and we present this idea that in each crisis there's this opportunity to break down or break through, and meditation plays a really important role in expanding our mind, breaking us from the resistance and the stubbornness and the consistency of what we've been doing to get us into that crisis in the first place. Meditation helps us open our mind and starts to access a field of wisdom and knowledge and awareness that we didn't have before, and then transition out of that crisis into a new level.
So basically, a crisis actually can be a gift.
If we've got the consciousness and the capacity, all crisis is a gift and all crisis is an opportunity. Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to see that.
It's very hard to see that, but in every crisis, you'll be able to find the magic, the jewel, the gold, the thing that's a message or a lesson that's actually guiding you to a new level. It's very hard to see it when you're in it. It's a lot easier to see it after you've been through it, and you look back and go, wow, I can actually see that divorce, that breakdown, that breakthrough, all of that was a major part of my journey, my growth. And it's very, very difficult for people to see that. But once we have that intelligence, that consciousness, that capacity to see it as it is, and we look at not just individual crisis, but we look at humanitarian crisis. Us as a species are moving very close to the edge of a cliff, and that's a major crisis that we're moving towards. And we've had opportunities to learn and grow through these, but we keep ignoring them, which is what was happening to me. The pandemic has been a crisis. The GFC was a crisis. The tech bubble was a crisis. The Asian meltdown was a crisis. We see crises happening all the time, but very rarely do we learn from them. We just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and that leads us to bigger crises.
And no wonder why the world's in a mess that it's in today.
Yeah, we just don't seem to be learning the lessons and adapting and changing. And there's a beautiful saying: suffering is proportional to our resistance to change. And we just keep getting so attached to the idea that if I accumulate more, if I get more, if I have more experiences, then I'm going to be happier. And we're very slow to learn that that's not the case.
That's a very important word, resistance, rather than acceptance.
Yeah.
And that's something
we're very resistant.
Yeah, that's something that I've been hearing a lot lately. That topic just keeps coming up. But, when you're resistant, you can't flow. You just can't go with the change, and you end up stuck in a much worse situation.
It's
So,
interesting. Tim Ferriss once said that people would actually rather be unhappy than change.
wow,
Hmm.
that's incredible.
Yeah, because we're
And
so afraid of the unfamiliar
uh-huh.
that we stay in the familiar. Could be a familiar abusive relationship, or a familiar shitty job, or a familiar species that's just accepted living in a very mediocre, substandard way with
Mhm,
immense amounts of suffering and turmoil and conflict and chaos and sickness. And so that's just because we have very limited adaptive capacity. And why
mhm,
I'm really passionate about meditation is that it increases our adaptive capacity. Now, if we're in scenarios that demands an increase in adaptive capacity, but we don't have an increase in
mhm,
adaptive capacity, it creates stress, it creates
mhm,
fracture, it creates turmoil. And so this is the problem we have in the world, that we're having increasing demands for adaptive capacity. That's the ability to adapt and change and grow and evolve.
mhm,
But we're not showing and accessing our inner adaptive capacity. And
mhm.
that's leading to immense levels of stress and chaos in our world.
So when you work with people, because I know you work with people one-on-one, you do group coaching, you do the retreats. When you work with people, can you see them, starting to change in their mindset? Do you see them starting to change in the way that they approach different problems, or that they different situations that might come up in their personal life?
Yeah, it's almost overnight we start to see change. It's quite remarkable.
Hmm.
I just get thousands of testimonials from people who
Hmm.
just continually send me messages after the weekend meditation course, after their retreat, or after their coaching, that it's been an absolute game changer for them. Just to
Hmm.
be able to see, because our world, that we look through a veneer, a lens that is
Hmm.
conditioned and coded into us. And when we start to pull back that veil and clear the
Hmm.
lens, we start to see the world in a very uninfluenced way. We start to
Hmm.
access a deeper knowingness about what's the best pathway for us to walk. And
Hmm.
that's very liberating for a lot of my students.
And I love the I love your tagline, transforming lives, changing the world one mind at a time. And because it really is the power of the mind that we don't really access in our daily lives, that there's how much, percentage that we actually do
Mm.
use. But when you can tap into that power of neuroplasticity and being able to, um, the malleability of our mind and our brain, and that's
I think
basically
it's,
what you're doing.
yeah, look, I think it's really important we understand the mind, because we've got the thinking mind, which is what we call in Sanskrit vasanas. And this is these neural pathways that are very conditioned and coded into us. So it's kind of like a software that we get given through our genetics, our
Mhm,
ancestry, and through our social fabric that we brought
mhm,
up in the world. And that sets us up with a particular pattern and thought forms that we just run with, and we just use that as our operating system.
mhm,
But then we've got the conscious mind as well, or pure conscious mind, we call it. And that's a realm of awareness that is where wisdom exists. It doesn't exist in the coded thinking mind, it exists beyond that. And so
mhm,
when we transcend the thinking mind and access the pure conscious mind, then from the pure conscious mind place, we start to observe the thinking mind and start to then have the ability to recode or transform the nature of our thoughts. But it
mhm,
comes from being aware and being able to observe from the conscious mind. And that's really why transcending meditations are so important, because it allows us to have access to that level of awareness
mhm.
where we access a state we call this turiya, which is a state where we're awake and we're conscious, but we're not having a thought. And there's
Okay.
this, there's a silent witness that can then watch the thoughts,
Mhm,
and then start to
mhm.
be thoughts and actions, and then start to be almost like a third party to the play that says, hey, I don't know that that's what you should be doing or thinking right now. I think this might be a better option for you. And it gives us a lot more sovereignty in our life and a lot more freedom.
Mhm. Now, go back to the portal. I want to talk
Mhm.
about the portal app. What is that, and how can people access that?
It's called Enter the Portal. It still needs a little bit more work. It's an app that's got some meditation programs, some yoga, it's an app. It's got a meditation timer in it. It's really about giving people access um, to the methods and the techniques
Mm,
that we wanted to share with the world that will help
mhm,
people transform their lives. They can get those techniques in the app at Enter the Portal, or on our website at Enter the Portal as well, where they can watch the film, read the book, and use our meditation
mhm,
programs, which really ancient methodologies of accessing deep states of stillness and awareness, but in a very contemporary way.
mhm. So let's go back to that 19-year-old who stepped onto the trading floor for the first time. What would that 19-year-old say if he could have looked into the future and saw himself as a filmmaker, as, a meditation coach, as, doing what you're doing now, what do you think would have gone through his mind?
Yeah, he would just be like, no, that's not going to happen. But if I could, if I could sit down and have a conversation with that 19-year-old, I would definitely say to that 19-year-old, I think it's probably a good idea you learn to meditate right now, buddy.
Yeah. Well, hindsight is 2020, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that 19-year-old looking to my current state would be very surprised that that would be the path that I'd end up
Uh-huh.
on. Mm.
Mhm. So, when did you become an author, and how did that happen?
I guess it's about trying to find mediums. When you start meditating, particularly these deeper styles, you access this field of knowledge. So knowledge,
Mhm.
there's data in our head, but there's knowledge in the field. And so the analogy I like to use, because some people might not really know what I'm talking about here, is if we look at the phone. Now the phone has certain qualities and characteristics inside the phone, and that's, let's just say that Apple is an iOS operating system, and that
Mhm.
operating system has been coded by a coder, and that has given that phone particular functionality, and that's as good as what the phone is inside the phone. But the phone's real richness and beauty and benefit comes from what the phone can access that's outside of the phone, and that's the World Wide Web of information. If we didn't
Mhm.
have access to the World Wide Web of information through the phone, then the phone becomes very limited in its capacity to provide something. And
Mhm.
that's kind of like humans that have access to the field of information and web of
Mhm.
information and wisdom and all creativity, and humans that don't. And that's why Oprah Winfrey says it's only from that place you can create your best work and your best life. And she
Mm.
uses these transcending meditations because she's talking about the field of intelligence and creative potential.
Mhm.
So when you start accessing that field, you've just had these huge downloads coming through. Just going back to the phone analogy, so what we're talking about is that the phone is inside the web. The web's not
Mhm.
inside the phone. So if I go to Bali or Antarctica or Canada or San Diego, that phone has access to that entire field of information that the phone is
Mhm.
in. It's not in the phone. And so that's something that we have access to around us at all times, is the infinite supply of intelligence and creative potential. And when it starts coming through you through your meditations, you get all these impulses to want to share that with the world. And so, oh, I'll share it with a film, I'll share it in an app,
Mhm.
I'll share it with a book. And so I was going to do journalism at university. I think this was just my outlet for writing. I
Mhm.
just really enjoyed writing. I read a lot of blogs and a lot of
Mhm.
books.
Mhm. So now, did you ever go to university?
I didn't make it in the end. I had the University of Life.
Well, that's a very powerful university. It's
Yeah,
it's
it's
quite the
a,
teacher. It's a lot more diverse, I think, than some of the other universities.
absolutely, yeah.
Mhm. So, what about your ebook? Don't you have
Yeah,
an
so
ebook?
absolutely. So what I created was I just found I had a lot of people coming to me with a similar sort of problems, a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of
Mhm.
overwhelm, just really struggling with life. And so um, I sort of bundled in all the steps that I used to turn my
Mm.
life around. And I have talked a lot about meditation, but it's really important we acknowledge the many, many other things that I've used as well
Mhm.
to go about transforming my life away from anxiety, addictions, depression, panic attacks, insomnia,
Mhm.
and that meditation played an integral role in that. But there was many other modalities and things that I used as well, and it's really important we acknowledge them. So I bundled a book called Faster, Deeper, Calm, which is a very efficient and effective guide or roadmap to
Mhm.
finding a much calmer life, free of these
Mhm.
anomalies like anxiety, depression,
Mhm.
insomnia, and addiction. And so that is a book that we're giving away for everyone, anyone that wants
Mhm.
to access that book. I think we've got a link in the show notes, and then
Mhm.
they can just
Absolutely.
they can get access to that book and download that. And yeah, it's just a step-by-step guide on how to live a much better, healthier, happier life.
Mhm. And it's so needed right about now. Do you believe, or do you feel like, yeah, and maybe it's because of the pandemic, or maybe we're just becoming more aware of talking about mental health. Do you think that we've actually kind of like we're in a situation where everybody is dealing with some sort of mental health issue? I mean, from depression, anxiety, addiction. There's just so much. It seems like everywhere you turn around, there's another person who's really struggling.
Yeah, it's definitely an epidemic that we have
Hmm.
now. And I did a conference not long ago, or spoke at a conference, and I asked the audience to be really honest with me when I asked this question. I asked them all, who in the audience is experiencing some degree of anxiety, overwhelm, panic attacks, restless leg syndrome, insomnia, adrenal fatigue, and 95% of them put their hand up. And it just says, oh, these are successful business people. You know, this is a marketing agency conference that I was speaking at. And I actually did it in 2 different cities, in 2 different states, and I had the same response in both cities. So it showed how widespread this is, and that's in wealthy, middle class to upper class society. So imagine, you know, people that have got more issues like struggling financially, or in domestic violence and all sorts of things. So yeah,
I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, we've come to live and normalize and accept this very mediocre substandard way of living, and we're very distracted and very resistant to change. It's really interesting where we're at as a species, and we're going to need to shake things up a little bit, unless you know, if we keep going down this path, it's not going to go well.
No, it's not. Now, if you can address just even briefly the relationship between meditation and mental health and your physical health and well-being.
Yeah, it's such an important thing, you know, and I'm so glad you mentioned it, because a lot of people think of meditation as a spiritual practice. It's more than anything, first and foremost, about your physiology. And your physiology can be in the parasympathetic nervous system state or the sympathetic nervous system state. And if it's in the sympathetic nervous system state, which is where a lot of people's physiology is right now, that is the stress response state. So we have brain functionality that's impaired when we're in the sympathetic nervous system state. We have in the physiology of the body when we're in sympathetic nervous system state, that's the stress response. We're seeing the blood coagulating and thickening. We're seeing digestive system shutting down. We see red and white blood cell count changing. We're seeing the storage of fat cells, which is leading to cholesterol and high blood pressure. We're seeing all these anomalies happening in the body simply because our bodies are way overstimulated, way too stressed. And what meditation does is that when we calm the mind, and particularly when we transcend into a deep stillness, we have identified that the body goes into a state of rest that's up to 4 times deeper than sleep. That is, we're awake, not having thoughts, as opposed to asleep and not having thoughts. So when we're in this state of silent awareness in meditation, the physiological state of rest is 4 times deeper than sleep. And that triggers this incredible, almost like chrysalis moment where the body starts to alchemize and transform. It's quite remarkable. Not so much the caterpillar going into the butterfly, but definitely we see a reorganization happening in the physiology. And for me, this was a game changer. You know, I went from having extreme, you know, addictions, anxiety, depression, insomnia, panic attacks, agoraphobia, not going out and not being able to go to work. And then I started meditating. Within weeks, all of that went away. And that was without doctors, without psychologists, psychotherapists, without pharmaceutical drugs. And I'm not saying we shouldn't use those, but we have to really get to the basis of what's going on, which is that our body is very stressed, and we need to find ways to get that body out of that stress response before we start all of that other stuff.
You cannot stay in the fight or flight.
No, it's
And
not. It
that's
will
where
lead to
most of us
major
live.
ramifications. That's right.
Yeah.
It will lead to major ramifications. It's like driving a car in first. If you've got a manual car with 4 gears and you're driving in first gear on the freeway for 6 hours, it's just going to blow up, right? Yeah.
All righty. And then, okay, now what about your coaching? So tell us about your coaching services, and I really want to hear about the retreats, because I found that really intriguing. And as I was looking through some of the locations, I thought, oh, this looks really like, might be in my future someday. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, with the coaching, I just found by default that as I started teaching meditation, a lot more people wanted further support and guidance. A lot of my students started to evolve and grow, and I found that some of them wanted to go on to become teachers themselves. Some of them wanted to grow their businesses, conscious leaders. So I started mentoring and coaching a lot of people who wanting to, I guess, kind of do similar to what I was doing, become speakers and authors and, coaches and run retreats and teachers. And so I was really helping them build their businesses out and set up structures. So we've got a group coaching format called the Zen Academy for Transformational Leadership, which is a training program for conscious leaders from anything from their social media, their websites, their underlying message to market, all the way through to their retreats and books and coaching programs. And then I do that in a one-on-one basis as well. And then the retreats, the retreats is really like an ultimate experience for people to take them out of their current scenario. it's a very deep transformational process. It's not an easy process. It's definitely not a walk in the park. So I'll just let everyone know before they come that, we put them through quite a process, but we give them amazing food. We do it in beautiful locations, and we really are looking to break the code that's currently their operating system and take them to a whole new level. So we do a lot of things like yoga and breath work and meditation and workshops and talks, and it's really nourishing. There's lots of rest, and it's just people go through huge shifts after the retreats. It's probably the most potent thing that I could do for someone in their life.
I would imagine that after one of those, you might not even know your own name for a couple of days as you go through that transformation.
Yeah, it's definitely a big shift that people go through for sure.
And now tell us a little bit, what are some of the titles of the books that you've written, just to give us an idea?
Yeah, so we've got the portal, which they can go to on my website, or they can go to entertheportal.com to find out. We've got some beautiful bundles that come with that book. They can get the film and our deep meditation program with the book, or just get the book on its own. And then they've got a book called Path to Peace, which is exploring the mechanics of change and how the forces of change operate within these three sort of cycles of creation, maintenance, and destruction. So it gives people a deeper understanding at any given point in time in their life, whether they're in a turbulent stage, which is the destructive operator trying to guide them forward, a maintenance phase, or whether they're in a growth phase. And so we really want to be dominating our life and living our life more in the growth phase, so that we have a lot more harmony and less conflict and less turmoil. There's a couple of others. I've got a little kids book called Missy Moo, which is it's actually called Missy Moo Meditates. So it's about Missy Moo and her sister Boo. My wife and I worked on that one together, and it's a beautiful little kids book where it teaches children why meditation is important and how to meditate in the book as well.
I love that. I just love that. I didn't see that one on your website. So that's great. I just, that's an awesome idea. Get them started young so they don't go through all of the turmoil that we do. Yeah. And so now, where can people find you? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, look, I mean, mainly Instagram at Tom Cronin, one word, Tom Cronin, Cronin, and I'm very responsive. So if anyone sends me a message, I always respond to it. It's not a bot, it's not my VA, it's actually me. So I like to be quite engaged with my audience. I think it's it's a nice sign of respect to sort of make sure that you're there to support them. So anyone can reach out to me there on Instagram and in my website at tomcronin.com.
Okay, and as far as getting your books, they could get that through your website as well?
Yeah, all at tomcronin.com. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Tom, this has been great. Thank you so much. I just really, really appreciate having you on the show and hearing all of your wisdom. And if you can just have like one final little pearl of wisdom, you've already given us an awful lot of fantastic information, but one pearl of wisdom or advice that you could leave the audience with, just to get them to start thinking, if they want to transform their lives, if they want to start looking into the meditation, what would you advise?
The first thing that comes to mind is that most of the world is currently in outcome-oriented fulfillment mode, which means that we seek fulfillment outside of ourselves, from our partner, our children, our Bitcoin, our holidays, our car, our house. And what that does is it leaves us very disempowered, because those outcomes, those acquisitions and actions, those experiences aren't always there, or won't always meet our expectation, or will certainly change. What we really want to cultivate is what we call internal or self-referred fulfillment, one that comes up from within. And what arises from within when we have enough quietness in our mind and body is the essence of joy, love, and bliss. It's the inherent nature of who we are at our deepest level. When we're less distracted by outcome-oriented fulfillment in the outside world, because that exhausts us trying to acquire those experiences and actions and objects. But when we quieten the mind, what bubbles up from within is the bliss, the joy, and the love that's within us at all times. And so just want to let people just start to think about, what is motivating this action? Am I in the quest to find fulfillment, or am I expressing fulfillment in action? So there's action for fulfillment, and there's action from fulfillment. Those two things are very, very different.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Tom, again, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for joining us, everyone. It's great to share space with you.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you as always. And do check out Tom's website, check out his Instagram, check out his books. Fantastic guy and fabulous information I think we can all really benefit from. So thanks again. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.